No maid lasted with the billionaire new wife, until a new black maid did the impossible. This is the story of how one woman's courage changed everything. This is the story of walls that crumbled, hearts that healed, and a miracle that no one saw coming. This is the story of Maria Rodriguez, and the billionaire's wife everyone said was beyond saving. But before we dive into this emotional journey of transformation, redemption, and breaking every barrier society puts in our way, let me ask you this. Have you ever met someone so difficult, so impossible, that everyone told you to give up on them? Have you ever been that person, pushing people away because you were afraid of letting them in? What you're about to hear is a true testament to the power of compassion over cruelty, vulnerability over perfection, and the revolutionary idea that no one, absolutely no one, is truly impossible to reach. So settle in, because this isn't just a story about a maid and her employer. It's about all of us. About the walls we build. About the courage it takes to tear them down. And about the impossible becoming possible when someone refuses to give up. Before we begin, please, kindly subscribe to this channel, like, comment and share. I'll be so happy if this story touches hearts all over the world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Whitmore estate, a sprawling mansion that sat like a crown jewel atop the highest hill in Rosewood Heights. It was the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines, with its pristine white columns, manicured gardens that stretched for acres, and an iron gate that spoke of old money and older secrets. Inside the servants' entrance, Maria Rodriguez clutched a small canvas bag and tried to steady her trembling hands. She was the 14th maid to be hired in 6 months, though she didn't know this yet. What she did know was that she needed this job desperately. Her daughter's medical bills wouldn't pay themselves, and the Whitmores paid better than anywhere else in the city. "You must be the new girl," came a weary voice from the shadows. Maria turned to find an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was impeccable, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much. "I'm Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper. I've been with the Whitmore family for 30 years. I served Mr. Whitmore's father, then Mr. Whitmore himself, and now—" She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Now I serve Mrs. Whitmore. The new Mrs. Whitmore." There was something in the way she said "new" that made Maria's stomach knot. But she pushed the feeling aside. She had bills to pay. She had a daughter counting on her. "I'm ready to work hard, Mrs. Chen. I promise I won't let you down." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly, but sadness flickered across her features. "They all say that, dear. They all do." She turned and began walking down the corridor, her footsteps echoing against the marble. "Come. I'll show you your duties before she wakes up." As Maria followed Mrs. Chen through the labyrinthine halls of the mansion, she couldn't help but marvel at the opulence surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceiling moldings that must have been hand-carved by master craftsmen. Original oil paintings adorned walls papered in silk. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that required constant, dedicated attention. "Mr. Whitmore is away on business," Mrs. Chen explained as they walked. "He's almost always away on business these days. The estate is primarily Mrs. Whitmore's domain now." "What's she like?" Maria ventured to ask. Mrs. Chen stopped walking. She turned to face Maria, and for a moment, the older woman seemed to be weighing whether to speak the truth or offer comfortable lies. Finally, she sighed. "Victoria Whitmore is complicated. She came from nothing, you understand. Married Mr. Whitmore 2 years ago, and overnight went from being a nobody to being one of the most powerful women in the city. Some people handle that transition gracefully." She paused meaningfully. "Mrs. Whitmore is not one of those people." Maria nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. "She's difficult." "Difficult is too kind a word, dear. She's impossible. Nothing is ever clean enough, perfect enough, proper enough. She finds fault with everything and everyone. The last maid quit after 3 days. The one before her lasted only 2. And the one before that. Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She left in tears after Mrs. Whitmore accused her of stealing a bracelet that later turned up in Mrs. Whitmore's own jewelry box. No apology was ever given. A chill ran down Maria's spine. "Why do you stay, Mrs. Chen?" The older woman's face grew distant. "Because Mr. Whitmore Sr. was a good man. A truly good man. And I made him a promise before he died that I would care for his family. Even if his family has changed into something he wouldn't recognize." She straightened her shoulders, as if physically pushing away the melancholy. "Come. Let me show you the morning routine." For the next 2 hours, Mrs. Chen walked Maria through an exhaustive list of tasks. The breakfast tray had to be prepared precisely at 7:30 a.m. The coffee had to be Colombian, medium roast, heated to exactly 185 degrees. 2 sugars, never 3. Heavy cream, never milk. The toast had to be golden brown, not light, not dark. The butter had to be European, served in a specific crystal dish. The morning newspaper had to be pressed flat, with the business section on top. And her bedroom, Mrs. Chen said as they climbed the grand staircase to the second floor. Never, ever enter unless explicitly summoned. Even then, knock 3 times and wait for permission. They stood outside a set of double doors carved with intricate rose patterns. From within, Maria could hear nothing. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. She's still sleeping. She rarely wakes before 9. You'll take her breakfast tray up at exactly 9:15. Not before, not after. Mrs. Chen checked her watch. You have 2 hours. I suggest you use them to familiarize yourself with the kitchen and prepare mentally. Working for Victoria Whitmore requires a strong constitution and an even stronger will. Maria spent those 2 hours in a state of growing anxiety. She met the cook, a portly man named James who had been with the family for 15 years. He showed her where everything was kept and offered her a sympathetic smile. Don't take it personally, whatever she says, he advised. It's not about you. It's never about you. She's fighting demons the rest of us can't see. At exactly 9:15, Maria carried the breakfast tray up the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she worried the coffee might slosh over the rim of its delicate china cup. She approached the carved doors and, following Mrs. Chen's instructions, knocked 3 times. Nothing. She waited, counting to 10 in her head. Still nothing. She knocked again. This time, a voice came from within. It was high, sharp, and dripping with irritation. What? Your breakfast. May I enter? A pause. Then, I suppose you must. Maria balanced the tray carefully and turned the handle. The door swung open to reveal a bedroom that was less a sleeping space and more a temple to luxury. The walls were covered in pale pink silk. A canopy bed dominated the center of the room, its posts carved from what looked like solid mahogany. Mirrors covered nearly every surface, reflecting the morning light in dizzying patterns. And there, sitting at a vanity table, was Victoria Whitmore. She was younger than Maria expected, perhaps in her early 30s. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and even in a silk robe at 9:15 in the morning, her makeup was flawless. She was beautiful in the way that wealthy women often are, a beauty that came not just from genetics but from expensive treatments, personal trainers, and the kind of maintenance that required both time and money. But her eyes were cold. Ice blue and calculating, they swept over Maria with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. You're new, Victoria said flatly. Yes, I'm Maria. I'll be. I didn't ask your name. Put the tray there. She gestured dismissively toward a small table near the window. Maria moved carefully, acutely aware of those cold eyes tracking her every movement. She set the tray down with as much grace as she could muster, making sure everything was arranged exactly as Mrs. Chen had instructed. Victoria didn't look at the food. Instead, she continued staring at Maria in the mirror's reflection. You're Mexican. Dominican, Mum. Same difference. Victoria turned on her stool, facing Maria directly now. Let me make something very clear. I have high standards. Very high standards. This house is a reflection of me, and I will not have it be anything less than perfect. Do you understand? Yes, The last girl said she understood too. She lasted 2 days. The one before her, 3. I have no patience for incompetence, laziness, or excuses. Victoria stood, her silk robe flowing around her like water. She walked to the breakfast tray and lifted the coffee cup, bringing it to her lips. She took a single sip. Then her face twisted in disgust. This is cold. Maria's heart sank. I prepared it exactly 15 minutes ago according to. I don't care what you did or didn't do. It's cold. Take it away and bring me fresh coffee. Immediately. Yes, Maria reached for the tray. And this time, Victoria added, her voice dropping to something even colder than before, get it right. Maria hurried from the room, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She practically ran down the stairs to the kitchen, where Mrs. Chen was waiting with an expression that said she'd expected this. Let me guess. The coffee was cold. How did you know? The coffee is always cold. Or too hot. Or too weak. Or too strong. Mrs. Chen took the tray from Maria's shaking hands. Make fresh coffee. I'll have James prepare a new tray. And Maria. Don't let her see you cry. She feeds on tears like a vampire feeds on blood. Maria blinked rapidly, forcing back the moisture that had gathered in her eyes. She wouldn't give Victoria Whitmore the satisfaction. She needed this job too badly. The second tray was delivered without incident, though Victoria didn't thank her or even acknowledge her presence. This, Maria would learn, was actually a victory. Silence was better than criticism. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of impossible tasks and constant anxiety. Maria cleaned the already spotless guest rooms, polished silver that gleamed like mirrors, and arranged flowers in vases under Mrs. Chen's watchful guidance. Every few hours, a bell would ring, an actual bell, like something from a Victorian novel, summoning staff to Victoria's side for some new demand. Fresh towels. Different fresh towels. Warmer fresh towels. The curtains needed adjusting. No, not like that. Can't you see the fold isn't perfect? There's dust on the mantel. Where? Right there. Are you blind? By evening, Maria's feet ached, her back throbbed, and her spirit felt bruised. But she'd survived day one, which made her more successful than many of her predecessors. As she prepared to leave through the servants' entrance, Mrs. Chen caught her arm. You did well today, the older woman said quietly. Better than most. It didn't feel like I did well. Trust me, if you'd done poorly, you'd know. The fact that she only rang for you 4 times is practically a miracle. Mrs. Chen's expression grew serious. Maria, I need to ask you something. Why do you need this job so badly? Because you do, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. Maria hesitated. She didn't like sharing her problems with strangers. But something about Mrs. Chen's grandmotherly concern broke through her defenses. My daughter, Lucia. She's 8. She has a heart condition, a congenital defect that needs surgery. The procedure is scheduled for 3 months from now, and our insurance only covers part of it. I need to save every penny I can. Her voice cracked slightly. She's everything to me. My whole world. Mrs. Chen's eyes softened with understanding and sympathy. Then you'll survive this. For her, you'll survive anything Victoria Whitmore throws at you. She squeezed Maria's arm gently. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be just as difficult. Maria went home to the small apartment she shared with Lucia and her mother. Her daughter was already asleep, her small chest rising and falling with the slightly labored breathing that had become normal. Maria kissed her forehead and whispered a prayer for strength. She would survive this. For Lucia, she would survive anything. Days turned into weeks, and Maria developed a routine. She learned to anticipate Victoria's moods, to read the subtle signs that meant an explosion was coming. She discovered that Victoria was cruelest on days when Mr. Whitmore was supposed to call but didn't. That she was most demanding after she'd been out with her friends, wealthy women who smiled to her face but whispered behind her back about the girl who'd married money. Maria also learned that she wasn't alone in suffering Victoria's wrath. The gardener was berated for flowers that bloomed in the wrong shade of pink. The driver was reprimanded for taking a route that added 3 minutes to the journey. Even Mrs. Chen, after 30 years of faithful service, was regularly subjected to cutting remarks about her age and efficiency. But there was a pattern to the cruelty, Maria realized. Victoria never attacked when witnesses were present. She saved her venom for private moments, for one-on-one encounters where there would be no corroboration, no proof. It was calculated, deliberate, the behavior of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and how to get away with it. 3 weeks into Maria's employment, something shifted. It was a Tuesday morning, and Maria was cleaning the second-floor hallway when she heard raised voices coming from the master bedroom. She paused, dust cloth in hand, not wanting to eavesdrop but unable to move without being heard. "Never home anymore, Richard." Victoria's voice was shrill with anger. "What's the point of being married if I never see my husband?" A deeper voice responded, male and tired. This was Mr. Whitmore, then. Maria had yet to meet him. He'd been traveling constantly since she started. "We've discussed this, Victoria. The Singapore deal requires my presence. I can't run a multi-billion-dollar company from home." "Your father did." "My father lived in a different era. Business is global now. I have to be where the money is. And I'm just supposed to sit here in this mausoleum, playing house. You have everything you could possibly want. This house, the cars, the credit cards with no limits. What more could? I want a husband." Victoria's voice cracked, and for just a moment, Maria heard something other than cruelty in it. Pain. Loneliness. "I want the man I married, not a checkbook with a signature." There was a long silence. When Richard Whitmore spoke again, his voice had softened slightly. "I know this isn't what you imagined. It's not what I imagined either. But this is the life we have. I'm doing my best to build something lasting, something that will. Something that will what? Outlast us? What good is an empire if we are too busy building it to actually live?" Victoria. "Just go, Richard. Go to Singapore or London or wherever it is you'd rather be than here with me. I'll be fine. I'm always fine." Maria heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly resumed her dusting, trying to look as though she'd heard nothing. The door opened, and a man in his late 40s emerged, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He had kind eyes, Maria noticed, tired and sad, but kind. He nodded to her as he passed. "Good morning." "Good morning, sir," Maria replied softly. He disappeared down the stairs, and moments later, Maria heard the front door close. Then silence. She continued her work, moving methodically down the hallway. She was nearly to the next room when Victoria's door opened again. Maria braced herself, expecting anger, accusations, some outlet for the frustration she'd just witnessed. But Victoria said nothing. She simply stood in the doorway, still in her silk robe, and stared at Maria with those ice-blue eyes. And in that moment, Maria saw something she hadn't seen before: vulnerability. Raw, painful vulnerability that Victoria tried desperately to hide behind her mask of cruelty. Then the moment passed. Victoria's face hardened again, and she retreated into her room without a word, closing the door firmly behind her. That evening, Mrs. Chen found Maria in the kitchen, preparing to leave for the day. "You heard them arguing this morning," the older woman said. It wasn't a question. Maria hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop." "These walls have ears, dear. It's impossible not to hear things in a house like this. Mrs. Chen sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. They used to be happy, you know. In the beginning, when they first got married. Richard was smitten, absolutely smitten. And Victoria, she seemed genuinely in love. But then, what happened? Reality happened. Victoria came from poverty, real poverty. Her mother cleaned houses, not unlike what you do now. She grew up watching wealthy people live their lives, always on the outside looking in. When she married Richard, she thought she'd finally made it. She thought she'd be happy. But she wasn't, Maria said quietly. How can you be happy when you're trying so hard to be someone you're not? She's terrified, you see. Terrified that people will see through the designer clothes and the perfect makeup and realize she doesn't belong. That she's still just the poor girl playing dress-up. So she pushes people away before they can reject her. She hurts them before they can hurt her. Maria absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the woman who had made her life miserable for weeks. That doesn't excuse how she treats people. No, Mrs. Chen agreed. It doesn't. Hurt people, but that doesn't make it right. I'm just giving you context, not justification. Understanding someone and excusing their behavior are two different things. Maria thought about this as she rode the bus home that night. She thought about Victoria, lonely in her mansion despite all her wealth. She thought about the pain in Victoria's voice when she asked her husband to stay. And she thought about her own mother, who had cleaned houses for decades and somehow managed to remain kind, generous, and full of love. Poverty doesn't make you cruel, Maria realized. Fear does. And Victoria Whitmore was one of the most frightened people she'd ever met. The next day, something strange happened. Maria was bringing the morning coffee tray upstairs when she encountered Victoria in the hallway. The woman was dressed impeccably as always, but her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. Your coffee, Maria said, holding out the tray. Victoria looked at the tray, then at Maria. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet Maria almost didn't hear it. Thank you. It was the first time Victoria had thanked any of the staff for anything. Maria was so shocked she nearly dropped the tray. Victoria took the coffee cup and walked away without another word, leaving Maria standing in the hallway, wondering if she'd imagined the whole exchange. But she hadn't imagined it, because Mrs. Chen noticed the change too. Did something happen with Mrs. Whitmore? The housekeeper asked later that afternoon. She seems different. Maria shrugged. She said thank you. That's all. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. She said thank you. Victoria Whitmore said thank you. I know it sounds crazy, but that's not crazy. That's a miracle. Mrs. Chen looked thoughtful. Or she's planning something. With her, you never know. The pattern continued over the next few days. Victoria remained cold and demanding, but the edge of cruelty had dulled slightly. She still found fault with everything, but she no longer seemed to take pleasure in it. If anything, she seemed tired, worn down by her own unhappiness. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Maria was cleaning the library, a massive room lined with leather-bound books that no one ever read. She was on a ladder, dusting the higher shelves, when she heard someone enter the room. She looked down to find Victoria standing in the doorway. The woman wasn't dressed in her usual designer perfection. Instead, she wore simple yoga pants and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Without the armor of couture and cosmetics, she looked younger, more vulnerable. I need to ask you something, Victoria said abruptly. Maria carefully climbed down from the ladder, her heart rate accelerating. Yes, Victoria crossed her arms, a defensive posture that made her seem smaller. Why do you stay? Everyone else quit or begged to be reassigned. Mrs. Chen says you need the money, but there are other jobs. Easier jobs. So why do you stay here, putting up with me? The question was so unexpected, so raw with genuine confusion, that Maria found herself answering honestly. My daughter needs surgery. A heart operation. It's expensive, and this job pays better than anywhere else I could find. So yes, I stay for the money. But also... She hesitated, unsure if she should continue. But also what?
Victoria pressed.
But also because I understand what it's like to be afraid. To feel like you don't belong, like you're one mistake away from losing everything. I grew up poor too, Mrs. Whitmore. I know what it's like to look at people like you and wonder what it would be like to never worry about money. And I know what it's like to feel like you have to prove yourself every single day. Victoria's face had gone very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You push people away because you're scared they'll see the real you and reject you. You're cruel because it's easier than being vulnerable. You test everyone who comes near you because you're waiting for them to fail, to prove that they're not good enough, or that you're not good enough. Maria took a breath, knowing she was crossing a line but unable to stop. But here's the thing, all that fear, all that anger, it's just making you miserable. And it's making everyone around you miserable too. For a long moment, Victoria just stared at her. Maria braced herself for the explosion, for the fury, for the immediate termination. But it didn't come. Instead, Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Not just a few tears that could be blinked away, but real, shoulder-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded inside her. Maria stood frozen, unsure what to do. Should she comfort her employer? Ignore the breakdown? Call for Mrs. Chen? Before she could decide, Victoria spoke through her tears. I am miserable. God, I'm so miserable. And I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be any different than this. She sank into one of the library's leather chairs, her perfect posture collapsing. Everyone thinks I have everything. The house, the money, the husband. But Richard barely looks at me anymore. His friends tolerate me because they have to. The society women I thought would welcome me laugh at me behind my back. And the staff, she laughed bitterly through her tears. The staff hate me. All of them hate me, and I don't blame them. Maria found herself moving closer, drawn by the raw pain in Victoria's voice. She'd seen this woman as a monster for weeks, but now she saw her as what she really was, a wounded person lashing out because she didn't know any other way to deal with her pain. They don't hate you, Maria said softly. They're afraid of you. There's a difference. Is there? Afraid, hate, it all amounts to the same thing. People avoiding me. People counting down the minutes until they can escape my presence. Victoria wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. My own husband travels constantly just to avoid being home with me. Do you know how that feels? To know that the man who supposedly loved you enough to marry you would rather be anywhere else in the world than by your side. Maria thought of Lucia's father, who had left when their daughter was diagnosed, unable to handle the stress and responsibility. She thought of the loneliness of single motherhood, of lying awake at night wondering if she was enough. Yes, she said simply. I do know. Victoria looked up at her, and for the first time, Maria saw real connection in those blue eyes. Recognition. Understanding. What do I do?
Victoria whispered.
How do I fix this? How do I fix me? Maria pulled up another chair and sat down, bringing herself to Victoria's level. You start by being honest. With yourself and with other people. You stop pretending you're perfect and start admitting when you're wrong. You apologize to the people you've hurt. And you make the choice, every single day, to be better than you were yesterday. That sounds impossible. It is impossible. For one day. But if you just focus on getting through one day at a time, being a little bit kinder, a little bit more honest, eventually, those days add up to something better. Victoria was quiet for a long time, processing this. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I am sorry for how I've treated you, for the coffee that was never hot enough and the dust that was never truly gone. For all of it. I'm so sorry. It was the most genuine thing Maria had ever heard her say. I accept your apology, Maria said. But Mrs. Whitmore, the person who most needs to hear that apology is you. You need to forgive yourself for being imperfect. For being human. Victoria nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face. And in that moment, something shifted in the mansion on the hill. The walls didn't literally move, and the dynamics wouldn't change overnight, but a door had opened, a door that had been locked tight for far too long. From that day forward, things were different. The change didn't happen overnight. Transformation never does. But slowly, gradually, Victoria Whitmore began to emerge from behind the walls she'd built around herself. It started small. The morning after their conversation in the library, Victoria came down to breakfast instead of having it delivered. She sat at the enormous dining table alone, but she greeted Maria with a tentative good morning that sounded rusty from disuse. Maria returned the greeting and served the coffee without fanfare. Victoria took a sip, and Maria braced herself for the inevitable complaint. It's good, Victoria said instead. Thank you. Two simple sentences, but they represented a seismic shift. Mrs. Chen noticed immediately. What did you do to her? The housekeeper asked, pulling Maria aside in the kitchen. Is she ill? Possessed? Having some kind of breakdown? She's trying, Maria said simply. She's trying to be better. People like her don't change. Maybe. But maybe they do if someone gives them a reason to. Over the following weeks, Victoria made more attempts at civility. She learned the names of the staff members she'd previously treated as interchangeable. She began to say please and thank you, though the words came out stiffly, as if in a foreign language she was still learning. She also started asking questions. About Maria's daughter. About Mrs. Chen's grandchildren. About James the cook's prize-winning tomato garden. At first, the staff responded with suspicion, waiting for the trap, for the moment when their vulnerability would be weaponized against them. But the trap never sprang. Victoria seemed genuinely interested, genuinely trying to connect with the people she'd spent so long holding at arm's length. Not that it was smooth sailing. Old habits die hard, and Victoria still had days where her temper flared, where she snapped at someone over a minor infraction. But now, when she did, she would pause. Take a breath. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she would apologize. The first time she apologized to Mrs. Chen for a sharp comment about the dust on a picture frame, the housekeeper nearly fainted. Thank you, Mrs. Chen managed, looking as though she'd just witnessed a miracle. Maria watched these small changes with a mixture of hope and caution. She knew transformation was possible. She believed in the human capacity for growth, but she also knew how easily people could slip back into old patterns when things got difficult. And things were about to get difficult. 6 weeks after the conversation in the library, Richard Whitmore came home. Not for a day or two, but for an extended stay. He had meetings in the city, he explained, that would keep him local for at least a month. Victoria's anxiety was palpable. She spent hours getting ready each morning, changing outfits 3 or 4 times, asking Maria's opinion with a vulnerability that was almost painful to witness. Does this make me look like I'm trying too hard? She'd ask, standing in front of her mirror in yet another designer dress. You look beautiful, Maria would reply honestly. But Mr. Whitmore married you. Not your clothes. He married who I pretended to be. I'm not sure he ever met the real me. Then maybe it's time he did. The first dinner with Richard home was tense. Maria served the meal, an elaborate spread that James had outdone himself preparing, and tried to be as invisible as possible. But even from the shadows, she could feel the distance between the couple. They sat at opposite ends of the long table, speaking in polite, careful tones about nothing important. As Maria was clearing the plates, Victoria suddenly spoke up. Richard, can we talk? Really talk? He looked surprised, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Of course. What about? About us. About this. She gestured around the dining room, but Maria understood she meant more than just the room. She meant their life, their marriage, the distance between them. Richard set down his fork carefully. Victoria, I'm not sure now is the time. It's never the time. You're always leaving, always busy, always somewhere else. But you're here now, so I'm asking. Please. Can we talk? Something in her voice, the raw honesty, the lack of performance, made Richard really look at her for the first time since he'd been home. Maria saw the moment when he truly saw his wife, perhaps for the first time in months. Yes, he said softly. Yes, we can talk. Maria slipped out of the room, giving them privacy. She found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen. They're talking, Maria reported. Talking or fighting? Talking. Really talking. Mrs. Chen made a soft sound of surprise. Miracles do happen, it seems. The conversation between Richard and Victoria lasted for hours. The staff could hear the murmur of voices from the dining room long into the evening. No one knew what was said, but when they finally emerged, both looked emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. Over the next few days, Maria noticed small changes in their dynamic. Richard started coming home for lunch. He and Victoria would walk through the gardens together in the evenings. They weren't fixed. Years of distance couldn't be bridged in days, but they were trying. Both of them were trying. One afternoon, Victoria asked Maria to join her in the sitting room for tea. Maria went reluctantly, still not entirely comfortable with the blurring of their professional boundaries. I wanted to thank you, Victoria said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. For what you said in the library that day. For being honest with me when no one else would. I probably overstepped, You did. Completely. Victoria smiled slightly. But you were right. I was so busy protecting myself that I forgot to actually live. I forgot that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. It's the hardest kind of courage, Maria agreed, accepting the teacup. I'm learning that. Victoria was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea thoughtfully. I talked to Richard. Really talked to him, maybe for the first time since we got married. I told him about my childhood, about my mother and how hard she worked, about feeling like I had to be perfect or he'd realize he'd made a mistake marrying me. What did he say? He cried. He actually cried and told me he fell in love with me because I made him laugh, because I was real in a way no one else in his world was. And then I became just like everyone else, polished and perfect and completely fake. She set down her teacup with a soft clink. He said he's been traveling so much because he didn't recognize me anymore. Didn't know how to reach the woman he married through all the walls I'd built. But he wants to try. We both want to try. It's terrifying, Maria. Being vulnerable. Admitting I need him, that I need anyone. But it's also liberating, somehow. Maria understood. She'd been independent for so long, raising Lucia on her own, that accepting help felt like admitting failure. But it wasn't failure. It was being human. There's something else, Victoria continued, her voice becoming tentative. Your daughter. The one who needs surgery. Mrs. Chen mentioned it months ago. And I'd like to help. Maria's heart clenched. I couldn't. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering to do something good with money that otherwise just sits in an account accumulating interest. Richard and I talked about it, and we both agree. We want to cover the cost of Lucia's surgery. All of it. Tears sprang to Maria's eyes before she could stop them. That's too much. I can't accept. Yes, you can. And you will. Because you gave me something far more valuable than money could ever buy. You gave me honesty when I needed it most. You saw me as a person, not a monster. You helped me find my way back to myself. Victoria reached across the small table and squeezed Maria's hand. "Let me do this. Please." Maria couldn't speak. She could only nod as tears streamed down her face. All the fear, all the worry she'd carried for months about how to afford Lucia surgery, it was lifting, floating away like smoke. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you." "You're welcome. And Maria, I have one more request." "Anything." "I want you to teach me. To teach me how to be kind without being weak. How to be vulnerable without being a victim. How to love without being afraid." Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You've figured out something I'm still learning. And I need a guide." Maria thought about this request. It was unusual, the wealthy woman asking the maid to teach her about life. But then, nothing about their relationship had been conventional from the start. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach anyone anything," Maria said honestly. "You're more qualified than you know. You've been through hardship and somehow remained kind. You're raising a daughter alone and somehow finding joy. You work for a woman who treated you terribly." Exactly 3 months after Maria had first walked through the servants' entrance of the Whitmore estate. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. Victoria Whitmore was not the same woman who had once terrorized staff and hidden behind walls of designer armor. She still had her difficult moments. Change is never linear, but she was trying. Every single day, she was trying. And the household had transformed with her. The staff no longer walked on eggshells. Laughter echoed through halls that had once known only tense silence. Mrs. Chen hummed while she worked, something she hadn't done in years. James experimented with new recipes, knowing his creativity would be appreciated rather than criticized. Even the gardener, old Mr. Peterson, had remarked that the roses seemed to bloom more vibrantly now that the house held less darkness. But the most profound transformation was in Victoria's marriage. Richard had extended his stay indefinitely, conducting most of his business from his home office. He and Victoria could be seen walking hand in hand through the gardens, talking for hours on the terrace, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. They were rediscovering each other, falling in love with who they actually were rather than who they'd pretended to be. One evening, as Maria was preparing to leave for the day, Victoria called her into the sitting room. Richard was there too, both of them looking excited about something. "Maria, sit down please," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair. "We have something we want to discuss with you." Maria sat, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Was the surgery funding being reconsidered? Richard leaned forward, his kind eyes warm. "First, I want to thank you. Victoria has told me about your conversation in the library, about how you helped her see what she was doing to herself and everyone around her. You gave me back my wife. There's no way to adequately thank you for that." "I didn't do anything special, sir. I just told her the truth." "Sometimes the truth is the most special thing we can offer," he said. "Which brings me to our proposal. We'd like to offer you a new position. Not as a maid, but as Victoria's personal assistant. You'd help her with her charitable work. Yes, she's starting a foundation. And more importantly, you'd continue to be her friend. Her guide, as she puts it." Maria was stunned. I don't have experience with that kind of work." "You have the most important qualification," Victoria interjected. "You're honest. You're kind. And you're not afraid to call me out when I'm being impossible." She smiled, and it was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way it never had before. Plus, it would be a substantial raise. Enough that you wouldn't have to worry about Lucia's follow-up care or anything else. "We've also had our lawyers draw up a scholarship fund in Lucia's name," Richard added. "When she's ready for college, everything will be covered. This is what we want to do, Maria. Let us do this." Maria looked between them, these two people who had transformed from distant figures of wealth into something approaching real friends. She thought about Lucia, about the surgery that was now just 2 weeks away, fully funded, with the best surgeons money could hire. She thought about her mother, who could finally retire from cleaning houses. She thought about the impossible situation she'd walked into 3 months ago and how it had become something beautiful. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I accept." Victoria stood and crossed the room, pulling Maria into an embrace that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me when I gave you every reason to." "Thank you for letting me in," Maria replied. "For being brave enough to change." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Victoria threw herself into planning her foundation, which would provide support services and financial assistance to families dealing with childhood medical crises. "I want to help other Lucias," she'd said, "and other Marias who are trying to hold everything together." She also made amends with the staff members she'd hurt. She sat down with each person individually, apologized sincerely, and asked what she could do to make things right. Some were skeptical. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but her consistent effort wore down even the most hardened skeptics. Mrs. Chen was perhaps the most affected by the change. One afternoon, she confided in Maria, "In 30 years, I've never been happier working in this house." Mr. Whitmore Sr. would be proud of what Victoria's becoming. She's found herself, finally. The day of Lucia's surgery arrived like a storm of hope and terror. Maria had taken the day off, of course, but she was surprised when Victoria and Richard appeared at the hospital waiting room. "We wanted to be here," Victoria said simply. "If that's okay." Maria, too overwhelmed to speak, simply nodded and let Victoria hold her hand as they waited through the 6-hour procedure. When the surgeon finally emerged with good news, the surgery had gone perfectly, Lucia would make a full recovery. Maria collapsed into Victoria's arms, sobbing with relief. Victoria held her tightly, crying too, both women releasing months of accumulated fear and stress. "She's going to be okay," Victoria kept repeating. "She's going to be okay." Richard stood nearby, his own eyes misty, one hand on his wife's shoulder. In that moment, they weren't employer and employee. They weren't even just friends. They were family, bound together by shared struggle and mutual transformation. When Lucia was finally awake and stable enough for visitors, Maria brought Victoria and Richard in to meet her. The 8-year-old girl, despite being hooked up to monitors and still groggy from anesthesia, managed a bright smile. "Are you my mom's boss?" she asked Victoria. Victoria glanced at Maria, then back at Lucia. "I'm your mom's friend. And yours too, if you'll have me." "Do you like unicorns?" Lucia asked seriously. "Because I only have friends who like unicorns." Victoria laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that transformed her entire face. "I love unicorns. In fact, when you're feeling better, I'd like to show you the unicorn garden we are building at the house. We are putting in flowers in every color of the rainbow." Lucia's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? Your mom helped design it?" As Victoria and Lucia chatted about unicorns and gardens and all manner of 8-year-old concerns, Maria felt something shift in her chest. This was what healing looked like. This was what it meant to break down walls and let people in. This was the impossible becoming possible. 3 months later, the Whitmore estate hosted its first charity gala for the newly established Lucia's Heart Foundation. The ballroom glittered with lights and was filled with the city's elite, all there to support childhood medical causes. But the evening's most powerful moment came when Victoria took the stage to speak. She stood before the microphone, elegant in a simple blue gown, and for a moment, Maria saw a flicker of the old fear cross her face. But then Victoria's eyes found Maria in the crowd, and she smiled. 3 months ago, Victoria began, I was the most miserable wealthy woman you'd ever meet. I had everything money could buy and absolutely nothing that mattered. I was cruel to good people. I pushed away the man I loved. I built walls so high that I couldn't see the sky anymore. The crowd was silent, captivated. And then a woman named Maria Rodriguez walked into my life. She was supposed to be just another maid. Instead, she became the catalyst for my transformation. She had every reason to hate me. I gave her plenty, but instead, she chose to see me as a human being. A broken, scared human being who needed help. Victoria paused, her voice thick with emotion. Maria's daughter, Lucia, needed heart surgery. Maria worked for me, enduring my impossible demands, because she loved her daughter more than she feared me. That kind of love, that kind of courage, changed me. It made me realize that real strength isn't about perfection or control. It's about vulnerability. It's about admitting when you're wrong and trying to be better. She looked directly at Maria now. This foundation exists because Maria taught me that wealth without compassion is worthless. That status without kindness is hollow. That the only thing that truly matters in this life is how we treat each other, especially when we have the power to cause harm. Victoria's voice broke slightly. I caused harm. To so many people. And I'm spending the rest of my life trying to balance those scales by doing good. By being better. By living up to the example that a woman with far less money but infinitely more grace showed me. The applause was thunderous. But Victoria wasn't finished. Maria, would you please come up here? Maria's heart nearly stopped. She shook her head slightly, but Victoria was insistent, gesturing her forward. On shaking legs, Maria made her way to the stage. Victoria took her hand and addressed the crowd once more. This foundation bears Lucia's name, but it exists because of Maria's strength. I'm proud to announce that Maria Rodriguez is not only the foundation's director but also my partner in this work. Together, we are going to help hundreds of families facing the impossible. We are going to prove that with courage, compassion, and community, nothing is truly impossible. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Maria, overwhelmed, could only stand beside Victoria, tears streaming down her face. She thought about that first morning, walking through the servants' entrance with trembling hands. She thought about every impossible task, every cruel word, every moment she'd wanted to quit but couldn't because Lucia needed her. And she thought about how all of it, every painful moment, had led to this. To transformation. To healing. To hope. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and guests began to depart, Maria found herself alone with Victoria on the terrace, looking out over the gardens that had become so familiar. You know what the really impossible part was? Victoria said quietly. Not changing my behavior. Not learning to be kind. The impossible part was forgiving myself. For all the hurt I caused. All the time I wasted being miserable. But you did it, Maria said. You did the impossible. We did it, Victoria corrected. You didn't give up on me. Even when you should have. Even when anyone else would have. Why? Why did you stay? Maria thought about the question. She could talk about the money, about Lucia's surgery, about practical necessity. But that wasn't the whole truth. Because I saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself. I saw someone who was hurting and didn't know how to stop. I saw someone who was drowning and lashing out because she didn't know how to ask for help. Maria turned to face Victoria fully. And I stayed because I believe people can change. I believe in second chances. I believe that our worst moments don't have to define us if we are willing to do the work to become better. Victoria wiped at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. I don't deserve you. That's the thing about grace, Maria said gently. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to love people anyway. Even when they're impossible. Especially when they're impossible. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last guests depart, watching the lights of the city twinkle in the distance. Two women from completely different worlds who had somehow found a way to bridge the gap between them. You know what I realized? Victoria said after a while. I spent so long trying to be someone I wasn't that I forgot who I actually was. Or maybe I never knew. Maybe I had to lose everything. My kindness, my humanity, my husband's love, to find myself. Maybe, Maria agreed. Or maybe you just needed someone to hold up a mirror so you could see what you'd become. And once you saw it, you had the courage to change. The courage you gave me. The courage you always had. I just reminded you it was there.
Victoria laughed softly.
Look at us. The impossible maid and the impossible employer. Who would have thought? Anyone with eyes, came a voice from behind them. Richard stepped onto the terrace, loosening his tie. I knew from the first week that Maria was different. That she might actually be the one to break through to you. I just hoped she'd stick around long enough to make it happen. He joined them at the terrace railing, putting his arm around Victoria's waist. She leaned into him naturally, comfortably, a gesture that would have been impossible just months before. Thank you, he said to Maria. For saving my marriage. For saving my wife. For reminding both of us what actually matters. I didn't save anything, Maria protested. You both did the work. You opened the door, Victoria said. That's more than anyone else could do. They stood together, the three of them, looking out at the gardens where the impossible had become possible. Where cruelty had transformed into kindness. Where walls had crumbled into bridges. Where a maid who had every reason to give up had instead chosen to stay and, in staying, had changed everything. Inside, Mrs. Chen was supervising the cleanup crew, directing them with the efficiency of 30 years' experience. She caught Maria's eye through the terrace doors and gave her a small nod of approval. A smile. An acknowledgement that said, "You did it. You did the impossible." And Maria smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in years. Lucia was healthy and thriving. Her mother had retired to a small house Victoria, and Richard had helped her buy. The foundation was already processing applications and changing lives. And somehow, impossibly, Maria had found a family in the most unlikely of places. She thought about all the maids who had come before her. The ones who had lasted days or weeks before fleeing Victoria's wrath. She thought about how close she'd come to being just another name on that long list of failures. But she'd stayed. Through the impossible tasks and the cruel words and the daily grind of trying to satisfy someone who seemed unsatisfiable. She'd stayed because she had to, but also because somewhere deep down, she'd sensed that Victoria's cruelty came from pain. And pain could be healed if someone was brave enough to try. The impossible had become possible because Maria Rodriguez had refused to give up. On the job. On Victoria. On the belief that people could change if given the right catalyst and the right support. As the final guests departed and the mansion settled into peaceful silence, Victoria turned to Maria with a question in her eyes. What's next for us? For the foundation? For all of this? Maria smiled, thinking about the dozens of families on their waiting list, the children who needed hope, the parents who needed support. Next, we change more lives. We prove that what happened here, this transformation, wasn't a fluke. That love and patience and refusing to give up on people can create miracles. More impossible things? Victoria asked. More impossible things, Maria confirmed. And as they walked back inside together, employer and employee, teacher and student, but most importantly, friends, Maria knew that the impossible would keep becoming possible. Because that's what happened when courage met compassion. When vulnerability met understanding. When someone cared enough to stay when everyone else had left. The Whitmore estate had once been a place of fear and loneliness. Now it was a beacon of hope and transformation. All because a black maid with a sick daughter had looked at an impossible situation and decided to stay. To try. To believe. And in believing, she had made the impossible not only possible but beautiful. 1 year later. The unicorn garden was in full bloom. Lucia ran through it, her laughter ringing out across the estate, her heart strong and healthy. She was joined by other children, kids from the foundation, kids whose families were being helped through their own impossible situations. Maria watched from a bench, her mother beside her, both of them marveling at how much life could change in a year. Victoria was inside with a group of parents, listening to their stories, offering support, being the kind of compassionate advocate she'd never imagined she could be. Richard was there too, as he always was these days, present in his marriage and his life in ways he'd never been before. "You did a good thing here, Mija," Maria's mother said in Spanish. "You saved that woman's soul." "She saved herself, Mama. I just showed her the door." Sometimes showing someone the door is everything. Mrs. Chen approached with a tray of lemonade, her face creased with contentment. "The children are having a wonderful time. And Mrs. Whitmore asked me to tell you the next foundation meeting is scheduled for Tuesday." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." The older woman paused, then added quietly, "I've worked in this house for 30 years, and I've never seen it filled with so much joy. What you did here, Maria, what you all did, it's a miracle. A real miracle." As Mrs. Chen walked away, Maria reflected on the word miracle. Was it a miracle? Or was it simply what happened when people chose courage over comfort, compassion over cruelty, connection over isolation? Maybe it was both. Victoria emerged from the house, spotting Maria on the bench. She waved, her whole face lighting up with genuine happiness, and headed over. "The Johnsons just got their approval for their daughter's surgery," she said, practically glowing. "Did you see their faces? That's what we are doing this for. That moment. That hope." "It never gets old," Maria agreed. Victoria sat down beside her, and the three women, Maria, her mother, and Victoria, sat in companionable silence, watching the children play in the impossible garden that had become possible. "You know what I was thinking," Victoria said after a while. "We should expand. Open more chapters in other cities. Help more families." "Always thinking bigger," Maria said with a smile. "I learned from the best. You taught me that impossible is just a challenge, not a limitation." As the afternoon sun cast golden light across the estate, Maria thought about that first morning when she'd walked through the servants' entrance with trembling hands and desperate hope. She'd thought she was just looking for a job. Instead, she'd found her purpose, her calling, her family. The impossible had become possible because no one gave up. Not Maria on Victoria. Not Victoria on herself. Not Richard on his marriage. Not the staff on believing in better days. And now, the impossible was becoming possible for dozens of other families. Hundreds. Soon. Maybe thousands. Eventually. All because a black maid had looked at an impossible billionaire's wife and seen not a monster, but a wounded human being who needed compassion. Who needed truth. Who needed someone to believe in her capacity for change. Lucia ran up to them, out of breath and beaming. "Mama. Ms. Victoria. Can we have a tea party in the garden? Please." Victoria looked at Maria, and they both smiled. "Of course, sweetie," Victoria said. "After all, nothing is impossible anymore." And in that moment, on that estate, with those people, it was absolutely true. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more life-changing stories.